Hare Krishna. Today we are going to revise chapter number 13 of Bhagavad Gita, and it is entitled as Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. Nature, Prakriti, then Enjoyer, the ultimate Bhagwanji, and the consciousness, that is the living being. So the interaction between these three, we are going to deliberate on this thing. And with the mercy of our Gurudev, we are going to learn about it. So let's do little prayers so that we can repeat as to what our Gurudev has taught us. The prayers goes like this. Vande Shri Guru Shri Yutpat Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavascha Shri Rupam Shri Sagratam Sagan Raghunatamicham Ta Sajivam Sadevetam Savdhutam Parijan Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagan Lalita Shri Vishakhant Vishtash Om Agyantrimandadsya Jnanancha Shalakya Chakshurunalvintam Yen Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Om Namo Mahavadanyay Krishna Prem Padaite Krishnai Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaur Vishay Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deen Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesh Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री द्वैत गदाधर शिवसादि गौर भक्तवृंदा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल माय धन्यवाद प्रणाम टू माय दीक्षा गुरु श्री भक्तिवेदांत नारायण महाराज and thereafter my धन्यवाद प्रणाम to all my शिक्षा guru and thereafter yatha yog धन्यवाद प्रणाम to all the listeners of this audio and video recording. So let's first understand the connection between chapter 12 and chapter 13. And before we do that, a little bit of understanding that we are now in chapter number 13. And as we have learned earlier, the chapter 1 to 6 is about Karma Yoga. Chapter 7 to 12 is about Bhakti Yoga, and chapter 13 to 18 is about Gyan Yoga. So these are the three main sections of Bhagavad Gita. The first 6 chapters, the second 6 chapters, and the last 6 chapters have separate knowledge about it. So we have completed Karma Yoga, that is chapter number 1 to 6. We have completed the entire Bhakti Yoga from chapter 7 to 12. Now we are in chapter number 13. So that is a transition. From Bhakti Yoga, we are now going to come to Gyan Yoga. In Bhakti Yoga, Krishna Bhagwan Ji had ended by teaching us about how to be his beloved. What are the qualities of a human being in the devotional service which Krishna Bhagwan Ji likes? And I'll just repeat it. And Bhagwan Ji says towards the end of chapter 12, he says, one who is equal to friends and enemies, who is equiposed in honor and dishonor, heat and cold, happiness and distress, fame and infamy, who is always free from contaminating association, always silent and satisfied with anything, who doesn't care for any residence, who is fixed in knowledge, and who is engaged in devotional service, such a person is very dear to me. So these are the qualities Bhagwan Ji had given towards the end of chapter number 12. And from this knowledge onwards, we now go on to chapter number 13. Now, Bhagwan Ji is very much determined in giving us the philosophical knowledge about how to come out of this repeated cycle of birth and death, how to free ourselves from this material world. So he gives us gyan, he gives us knowledge. So in the 6 chapters which we are going to now understand, it is all about gyan, knowledge. Knowledge about nature, knowledge about Bhagavan Ji, and knowledge about the living beings. So Krishna Bhagwan Ji promises that he will deliver his devotees from the repeated cycle of birth and death. And now this is a very key constituent of the entire Vedic knowledge. And Krishan Bhagwanji, with his very profound depth and knowledge about Gyan Yoga, he is determined to help us so that we can come out of this repeated cycle of birth. Okay, the chapter starts with Arjun asking questions. He asks 6 questions in shlok number 1 itself. And he asks about what is Prakriti, that is the nature, what is Purish, that is the enjoyer, what is Kshetra, that is the field or our body, and what is Kshetragya, who the knower of the field, and then what is Gyan, that is the knowledge, and lastly, what is the Jnanam, that is the object of knowledge. And the entire rest of the chapter is answered by Krishan Bhagwanji about these 6 questions. Now, Arjun is asking questions on behalf of the human beings so that they can get benefit. And in this manner, Krishan Bhagwanji gets an opportunity to help the human beings so that they can come out of the repeated cycle of birth and death, repeated cycle of birth and death. So let's see how the chapter progresses. The first shlok is about the 6 questions, and the rest of the chapter is about the reply by Krishan Bhagwanji to these questions. Now, in shlok number 2 and 3, Krishan Bhagwanji mentions about Kshetra and Kshetragya. Kshetra means the human body, and Kshetragya means the knower of this body, that is the soul or the human being and the super soul. So he explains about these things. And the human body is constituent of various material things that we shall be discussing very soon about it. And Kishan Bhagwanji then has mentioned that the entire field of activities or this body is constituent of 24 elements. And all these things have been discussed in various religious books in our Shastras by the rishis also. So some total of this he has mentioned about Vedanta Sutras, that it is mentioned over there also. So some total of all these things he describes about the body and the soul. And in the chapter number 6 and 7, Bhagwanji describes about the field of activities or the body as to what are the constituents of the body is made up of what things. So body is made up of 24 elements, and this is mentioned in shlok number 6 and 7. And Bhagwanji says the 5 great elements: false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses, and the mind, the 5 sense objects: desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions. All these are considered in summary to be the field of activities and its interactions. The field of activity is wherever the action is taking place, that is this human body. So this is the field of activity is referred to as the body. So from all the authoritative statements of the great sages, the Vedic hymns, and the authority of the Vedanta Sutra, the components of this world can be understood as follows. First, there are earth, water, air, ether, fire. These are the 5 great elements, or also called Mahabhuta. Then there are false ego, intelligence, and the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of nature, that is Satagun, Rajagun, and Tamogun, goodness, passion, and ignorance. Then there are 5 senses for acquiring knowledge, that is eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. Then 5 working senses: voice, legs, hands, anus, and the genitals. Then above the senses, there is the mind, which is within and which can be called sense within. Therefore, including the mind, there are 11 senses altogether. Then there are five objects of the senses: smell, taste, form, touch, and sound. Now, the aggregate of these 24 elements is called the field of activity or our human body. If one makes an analytical study of these 24 subjects, then he can very well understand the field of activity. So here Bhagwanji has mentioned as what is the field of activity. Then we come to who is the knower of all these things, knower of this human body. That is our soul, which is residing within our body. And then Krishan Bhagwanji says that the soul, which is residing in self and in ourself, is not the only thing which knows about the field of activity or the human body. He himself also knows about the field of activity or about the body of all living beings. Not only one human being, he knows about the human body of each and every living body. Each and every living body awareness is with Krishna Bhagwanji himself. So that is mentioned in shlok number 6 and 7. Now, going further, now Bhagwanji talks about the knowledge. That is Gyan, what Arjun asked for. And this is given in shlok number uh, 8 to 12. Here, Bhagwanji mentions about the process of gaining knowledge. And this is mentioned in, as I mentioned, in shlok number 8 and 12. And he starts with the word humility. That humility, namra bhav, don't consider yourself to be all the time asking for fame and fame and fame. Humility, be humble. And Bhagwanji mentions the embodied soul is entrapped by the body, which is casing made of the 24 elements. And the process of knowledge, as described here, is the means to get out of it. How to get out of this human body so that repeated cycle of birth and death do not take place. That is called knowledge. Okay. Then going further, of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of this verse number 8 to 12, and that is Mai Jananya Yogena Bhaktir Avya Bhajarinini. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. The whatever steps, whatever things are there to be known, everything terminates once you go into the devotional service towards bhakti of Krishna Bhagwanji. So there are about 20 processes Bhagwanji has given about this knowledge. And these 20 processes are of no use unless you go into devotional service to Bhagwanji. These are given, as I mentioned, in shlok number 8 and 12. Just to mention these processes, I'll read out for a few of them: humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master or guru, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense. These are all steps of knowledge, process of knowledge, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these Krishna Bhagwanji says, I declare to be knowledge. Anything, anything out of these things, what I mentioned, these 20 steps, is totally ignorance. right? So this is the process of getting knowledge, so that we can get out of this human body full of material 24 elements which I have discussed just now, and so that we do not have to take a repeated cycle of birth and deaths. Now, going further, in shlok number 13 to 19, Krishna Bhagwan Ji mentions about the Jnanam, the object of knowledge, what we need to learn, what we need to gain knowledge about. So, this is about the soul and the super soul, Atma and Paramatma. The knowledge about these things are given in shlok number 13 to 19, and we will try to understand this a little bit. There is no specific date at which the Jivas was born. This talking of the soul. Nor can anyone trace out the history of the Jivatma's manifestation from the Supreme Lord. Therefore, the soul is beginningless. Now, in this section, Bhagwanji is talking about the soul and the super soul, the relation between the two. The Vedic literature confirms this na jayate mrityate va vipasita. The knower of the body is never born and never dies, and he is full of knowledge. The soul is never born and it never dies. It is what we call chinmay. It is everlasting. It is eternal. Then the person who knows this, he is full of knowledge. Going further, Bhagwanji talks about the super soul. The Supreme Lord, as the Supreme Soul, is the ultimate controller of everything. And this is mentioned in the Vedic literature also. And he is the Pradhan, Kshetra, Patir, and Gunesaha, above the three modes of nature. He is the chief knower of the body and the master of the three modes of material nature. So in this section, Bhagwanji has talked about the soul and the super soul. And ultimately, it is the super soul or Paramatma who knows everything. He is above the three modes of nature. The human being is controlled by the three modes of nature. He acts only as per goodness, passion, or ignorance. But the super soul is above all these things. So these are mentioned in shlok number 13 to 19. And further, Bhagwanji mentioned in shlok number 19, knowledge and development of knowledge mean understanding oneself in Krishna consciousness. We are being led by material consciousness. But as soon as we transfer all consciousness to Krishna's activities and realize that Krishna is everything, then we attain real knowledge. In other words, knowledge is nothing but the preliminary stage of understanding devotional service perfectly. Now, to summarize, one may understand the verses 6 and 7, beginning from Mahabhutani and continuing, therefore, in Chetan Dhiratri. Analyze the material elements and certain manifestations of the symptoms of life. These combine to form the body and the field of activities. And verses 8 to 12 from Amanitavam through Tattva Janardha Darshanaham describe the process of knowledge for understanding both types of knower of the field of activities, namely the soul and the super soul. Then verses 13 through 18, beginning from Anadi Mat Param and continuing through Hrdi Sarasa Vishtaham, describe the soul and the super lord or the super soul. Thus, three items have been described: the field of activity, that is the body, the process of understanding, that is the knowledge, and both the soul and the super soul. It is specifically described here that only the unalloyed devotees of the Lord can understand these three items clearly. A non-devotee cannot understand all this thing. So what it means is that we have to be under the guidance of a guru and who can teach us to become a devotee, and then we will be able to understand what Krishna Bhagwan Ji has mentioned over here. Right. So going further from in shlok number 20 and 26, from 20 to 26, Bhagwan Ji talks about Prakriti, that is nature, and Purusha, or the human beings. Now, Purusha is also termed as soul, Atma, but Paramatma is the super soul. Always remember that whenever we talk about Purusha, the super soul or the Paramatma should also be considered simultaneously. The Purusha, the human being, we people are conditioned. But the super soul or the Paramatma, he has no limitations. He is unconditioned. He is controller. He is the ultimate doer of everything. So Bhagwan Ji talks about the three modes of nature and how they are all related. Purusha and what to call Prakriti. These are given in shlok number 20 to 26. I'll just read out for you. And this is mentioned by the knowledge given in this chapter, one can understand the body, that is the field of activities, and the knowers of the body, both the individual soul and the super soul. The body is the field of activity and is composed of those 24 elements of material nature. The individual soul that is embodied and enjoying the activities of the body is the Purusha, or the living entity. He is one knower and the other is the super soul. Of course, it is to be understood that both the super soul and the individual entity are different manifestations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The living entity is in the category of his energy, and the super soul is in the category of his personal expansion. Material nature and the living entities should be understood to be beginningless. Both Prakriti and the Atma, or the soul, should be considered as beginningless. Their transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. Nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments on this world. Now, because we have desires, Krishna Bhagwanji has given us this body so that we can use it as a machine to fulfill our desires by interacting with the nature. Always remember one thing: whenever there is any desire in the human being, the super soul residing within us, it sanctions it, whether it should be fulfilled or not. And when the sanction is given, the human body interacts with the nature, with the material nature, and then our desire is fulfilled. Now, because we have so many desires in the body, therefore, we are always entangled in this material world. We are not able to get out of this repeated cycle of birth and death because our desires are yet to be fulfilled. When we become desireless, when we are totally into bhakti, when we are totally into devotional service, that whatever we do is for Krishna Bhagwan Ji, that is the time when we reach Krishna Bhagwan Ji. Then is the time when we'll be freed from this repeated cycle of birth and death. So that is the relationship between Prakriti and Purusha. Further, Bhagwanji says, the living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life. enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with the material nature. Thus, he meets with the good and evil among various species. Now, because of these desires, we end up, whenever we leave this body, we may not get the ultimate opportunity to go to Bhagwanji's dham or to his abode. We may get another body. Now, that body may not be of the human being, it may be of an animal or a beast or somebody in the water, living being over there, right? Or it may be a bird. So this all depends upon the activities and our desires which we have and which we are interacting with the nature. So this is a thing which we have to keep in mind: the relationship between the nature, the human body, the soul, the super soul, and the prakriti. Then Bhagwanji further says, yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor, who exists as the overseer and the permitter, and who is known as the super soul. One who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again, regardless of his present position. So, this is the understanding about Prakriti and Purusha. Then, in the last section, that is Shlok number 27 to 35, Bhagwanji talks of philosophy, of vision, of what you call Gyan, so that he is very merciful, so that the human beings can learn about it, they can understand about it, and get out of this repeated cycle of birth and death. He is very merciful and very much concerned that whatever mistakes we have done in the past, we can improve upon that by doing bhakti regularly, by understanding this gyan, by understanding this knowledge. Now, this section is all about gyan. So, shlok number 27 to 35 is further philosophical and a gyan given by Krishna Bhagwanji. I'll just read out for you. He says to Arjun, know that whatever you see in existence, both the moving and the non moving, is only a combination of the field of activities, that is the body, and the knower of the field, that is the human being, our soul. One who sees the super soul equally present everywhere, in every living being, does not degrade himself by his mind. Thus, he approaches the transcendental destination. One who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. Those with the vision of eternity can see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. Then Bhagwanji gives the example of a sky and the sun to elaborate his philosophical knowledge which he wants to give to the human being. Bhagwanji says about the sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it is all pervading. Similarly, the soul situated in Brahma vision does not mix with anybody, though situated in that body. And about the sun, Bhagwanji says, the sun alone illuminates all this universe. So does the living entity, one within the body, illuminate the entire body of consciousness. The Atma and the Paramatma, which is living within it, only as long as they are in the body, the whole body is working. It is illuminated, just like the sun illuminates the entire universe. And lastly, in the last shlok 35, Bhagwanji mentions that those who see with eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body, and can also understand the process of liberation from bondage in material nature, attain the supreme goal. So, this is, ladies and gentlemen, the end of chapter number 35. And now we are in the Gyan Yoga. Bhagwanji is trying to give bhakti, the devotional service, through giving us Gyan. We shall continue with chapter number 14, verse by verse. Thank you very much for being with me. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.